Hey, good afternoon to you. It's now 5:06 News Talk 105.9 WMAL. We're making sense of the news. Coming up, Christian Heiens is with us. He's a political analyst, election modeler, and he'll tell us all about Virginia. What is happening in Virginia? We'll get to the bottom of that. But let's first and foremost talk about what's happening with Hispanic voters as Kamala Harris tries to pitch them last night and suggest that they all want amnesty. I think that was the theme of the night. If you're Hispanic, obviously you want amnesty for illegal aliens. You desire that so much. That was Kamala Harris's perspective last night. Joining me now to discuss what happened on Univision is Jorge Bonilla. You'll know him from Newsbusters, and if you're ever in Miami, Miami's Radio Libre, 790 AM. Jorge, good to be with you today and have you on the show. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Vince. It's great to be back.
The Kamala Harris Univision event, what did you think of it, sir?
Well, first and foremost, I grew up in a middle-class household. And, it's very important to make a note of that as we talk about our hopes and dreams and aspirations. Oh my God, she ran the same playbook, the same shtick.
Yeah,
it was the same thing. So it was a tired pander. It was a last-minute pander, I think, and it wasn't optimal. I mean, it wasn't terrible. She didn't totally stink up the joint, but it was just not good.
How do you, Jorge? I just have to ask right away. How do you say the word "okay"? How do you do that?
How do you say the word "okay"?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I heard you.
Like
okay.
in Spanish? Like in Spanish, you mean?
Yeah, like if you gave it like a little Spanish twist, how would you say the word "okay"?
You say "okay."
Okay. All right. Well, let's hear. This is Kamala's version of events last night. Kamala Harris attempting, I think, a pseudo-Spanish accent.
Well, first of all, thank you for the question. I hope your family is okay and your home is okay.
Did she nail it?
She got there. I think it was half-hearted. It's almost like she repented halfway through. Is what it seems like, because she knows she's gotten nailed in the past for attempting Spanish accents in Hispandering, but it was pretty bad. Notwithstanding, abortive accent attempt. Notwithstanding, it was not good.
No, it wasn't good. In fact, let me play some audio. I mentioned that she was pitching amnesty. She was doing it a little obliquely, but that really is what she was pitching last night to that audience. Here's Kamala saying the first thing they did when they got into office, meaning Biden and Harris, is offer amnesty.
And the first bill we offered Congress, before we did the bipartisan infrastructure bill, before we did the work on gun safety, before we did the work on investing in chips and science, the first bill we offered within hours of taking the oath was a bill to fix the immigration system, including creating a comprehensive, earned pathway to citizenship for hardworking people.
Yeah, the first thing we did before driving up inflation was we offered amnesty to illegals. Jorge, what was that? Is that an appealing message to Hispanic viewers, do you think?
It's an appealing message to Joe Biden beforehand and Kamala Harris's true Hispanic base, which is what I call the professional Latinx. It is all these organizations, all these nonprofit organizations that litter the landscape in Washington, D.C., New York City, and California, that for decades have wanted to tell Hispanics how to live and how to vote and how to act, but really have no effect in Hispanics' everyday lives, except when they champion these sort of politicals into office. And I'm talking about organizations like Unidos US, formerly known as the National Council of La Raza, so many other similar types of organizations. That's their true base. So in order to mollify that base, Joe Biden promised, he learned from Obama's mistake. When Obama had 60 votes in the Senate, he did not file his comprehensive immigration reform. So it didn't get done. Obamacare got done instead. So Joe Biden, very pro forma, he said, on day one, I'll file my bill. Even though it was DOA in the Senate, but that way he could just check off the box and say, hey, look, I filed my bill. Leave me alone. So that's all that was.
Mm-hmm.
But Kamala Harris wants to say, oh, look, we did, we filed the bill. We did all of this and all of that. But really, it was a pathetic display. She just wanted to offer amnesty and continue to pitch the dead Senate bill that was going to allow 1.8 million illegals in a year. So that was really what she was all about.
So one of the things I noticed about the questioners that Univision selected last night, several of them were basically talking about how do we take better care of illegal aliens. That was the substance of the questioning that came out. And that, to me, it seemed like a choice by Univision to go with that. And as you just pointed out, Jorge Bonilla, that American voters of Hispanic descent, that's the last thing on their mind. What did you make of that?
Well, look, when it comes to Univision, when it comes to Telemundo, at the end of the day, these are still very activist-leaning networks and organizations, and they depend very heavily on a constant inflow of non-English speaking immigrants, whether legally in the country or not, in order to replenish their viewing base. Because if you think about it, you get some illegals come in, they have a kid. That kid is going to grow up in the U.S. He or she is going to speak English, go to school, be cultured in the American system. They're not going to watch Univision and Telemundo. They'll watch what everybody else watches because they go to school with our kids and play with our kids and do whatever. So because of this, Univision and Telemundo, they still very much depend on immigration advocacy. That's still a big part of their business model. So therefore, when you pre-screen for questions, a lot of that is going to lean towards immigration and lean towards amnesty, even though the polling suggests otherwise among the Hispanic electorate. Univision is playing towards their viewership, not necessarily their electorate. And that's why immigration is going to be so prominent in the questioning.
President Trump was supposed to conduct a town hall with Univision actually in Miami earlier this week. That got delayed because of Hurricane Milton's arrival. It's been rescheduled now for next week, October 16th. If President Trump gets up there and he's confronted with some of these similar questions, like how are you going to take care of illegal aliens? My guess is he's going to give some version of an answer that's like, look, we're in favor of immigration, but you've got to come into this country legally. If he says that, how does that go over with Univision's audience?
It'll go over like the proverbial fart in an elevator with the audience and with the talent and with the hosts. But those of us who vote are not necessarily Univision's audience. So, it won't convey necessarily. But like I said, Univision's audience is not necessarily the voting electorate. So, I think he's aware of that, and that's going to play a certain way. But at the end of the day, we still want law and order, and we still want a sane border. And in that sense, Hispanics are just like everybody else.
Yeah.
The main focus of this election is going to be the economy. It's going to be crime. It's going to be inflation. It's going to be this whole other panoply of things that isn't necessarily immigration, except on the enforcement side. Mm-hmm. Hispanics support not blowing the border wide open, and President Trump knows that. That
moderator on Univision is kind of an interesting guy, Enrique Acevedo, because I was telling the audience about a week or so ago when I found out that he was moderating both of these town halls. I went back and I looked. He has an interview with President Trump that I think he conducted earlier this year. And when he did it, the Democrats were so furious that he wasn't mean to Trump that they actually got the Congressional Hispanic Caucus involved with a letter of condemnation demanding answers from Univision. So this is, although you're right to point out Univision's left-wing leanings, it's kind of interesting that this guy has basically said, I'm not here to be vicious to Trump. I see my job as getting information out of him. What do you make of that?
Well, it's an interesting thing because Univision in 2022, they got bought out by Televisa, which is this giant Mexican media conglomerate. And according to sources, when the Mexicans walked in and saw the newsroom in Doral in Miami, they were absolutely horrified because they didn't know that they had basically acquired a Democrat talking points toilet of a news division. So they tried to instill some reforms. Those reforms have largely failed. Now Univision just recently got rid of their CEO. They have a new CEO in there. They non-renewed Jorge Ramos And the way they did it, it was basically a backwards, kind of a backhanded firing of Jorge Ramos, according to sources. So they're really trying to implement some reforms, and this is where Acevedo comes in. It was pretty interesting to me that they didn't trust the local talent in Miami in Univision headquarters to conduct this interview. So they flew Acevedo in from Mexico to do both the Biden and the Trump interviews. And you're absolutely right. The left was incensed. The electeds, the organizations, there were people decrying foreign interference in our elections. You had MSNBC up in arms. It was hilarious.
Yeah.
It was hilarious. It was absolutely hilarious.
And it was a good interview. It was not like some sort of softball interview. He was non-confrontational, but he asked all sorts of interesting, important questions, and Trump answered them. And for that, the media excoriated him. It's just remarkable. Hey, Jorge, before I let you go, I do want to ask, certainly you're in radio, you're in Hispanic radio, and one of the big concerns I think that so many people have right now is what's happening with Hispanic radio stations across the country. We watch as a Soros group has taken over a lot of them, and there's been a lot of effort to make the programming even more left-wing all across the country. What's happening right now?
Well, I think what this is indicative of is that there's great interest in Spanish language media. There's, to whatever extent that organization is trying to implement content change, I'm not aware of. I don't think they've put in a talk radio platform yet. They may in the future. They may for future elections. But what this reflects, Vince, is the importance of Spanish language media. So much so that Fox News has stepped up. I'm thrilled about this. Fox News has stepped up, and they've rolled out Fox Noticias, and they've translated the website into Spanish and made that available for viewers. And they're doing now Spanish language programming. So it's a very exciting time, and I think people are realizing the importance of Spanish language media. For many years, it was something that the right didn't look at and didn't consider. It's still important. And so, I'm thrilled to be a part of it, and I'm thrilled that these things are happening.
And is the Trump campaign engaging? Obviously, he's going to do the Univision interview, but are they advertising and engaging in Spanish language media?
Yes, they are. In those, like anything, you have to be judicious with your campaign dollars. And so Florida, it used to be a swing state. It isn't anymore. So now those efforts, to my knowledge, usually what they do is they shift to Pennsylvania, they shift to Georgia,
Arizona.
Many of the articles that used to be written 4 years ago about the Puerto Rican community in Kissimmee, now they're being written about Puerto Ricans in Reading, PA, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that shift. So you now you see that the spending is still out there. It's just allocated judiciously.
Right, yeah, to try and capture some of these swing states. Fascinating.
Right.
Jorge Bonilla, I'm so glad to have you on the show today. Always good to talk to you, and we can't wait to do it again soon. All right, let's go to the phones. I've got Cindy calling in from Reston now, line 1. Cindy, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hello, Vince. It's so good to be on your show.
Well, thank you for calling.
I called a couple weeks ago saying how talked to Corey and told him how disappointed I was that I couldn't vote on September 20th when you guys were going to be at the Fairfax County Government Center.
Yeah.
But I got to do something even better today.
What's that?
I got to vote with my college-age daughter who voted in her first presidential election. It was so much better than being with you guys.
I love that. I love that so much. Now, Cindy, I just got to make sure. You didn't cancel each other's votes out, did you?
Absolutely not. We raised very conservative kids. My husband will vote on Monday with our son, who's voting in his first presidential election as well.
That's fantastic. And what did you notice at the polls as you went with your daughter today? Anything interesting?
Well, the line was long. It took us 38 minutes from start to finish, and we stopped at the Republican table on the way out so we could get a selfie, and we chatted with the gentleman there at they're running the table, and I honestly didn't see anybody the whole time going over to the Democrat tent.
Oh, really?
So, and we know that a couple people around us were definitely voting Republican. So,
did you see the Republican sample ballot in hands in that line?
no, actually, somebody handed my daughter the Democrat ballot, and she's like, I really don't want this. But I said, no, well, what you need to do is you just need to go to the bottom and read the bonds and the referendums.
Yes.
You'll be fine, and then, you just vote the opposite.
Yeah, it helps. Yeah, usually when it's like, hey, would you like to go deeper into debt? You just say no. That's the answer to that
Yes,
question.
Absolutely. That's what I told her. I said, you vote no, and this one's okay. The changing the amendment, that one, Constitution, that one's okay.
That's right. I believe that was cutting taxes for the survivors of military families who lose their loved ones. Yeah. No, that's good news. So a lot of people were there. The lines were long, and this was at the Fairfax County Government Center?
This was at the Government Center, yes.
Oh, good. And how was morale at the Republican booth today?
The line was very long when we left, too. As a matter of fact, it might have been longer than when we got there.
Oh, excellent. And how was morale with the Republicans?
Oh, they were a lot of fun to talk to.
Good. Well, they're good people. That's great.
They were trying to get me to volunteer. I may volunteer. So
you know something? You're already doing it now. You're reminding people that they should do their duty at this very moment. Like you, get their kids, their voting age kids, out to the polls and cast those ballots. Hey, Cindy, thank you very much. Congrats to you for being a great mother, and thank you for voting today.
Thanks. Have a great weekend.
You too, Cindy. That's Cindy out in Reston. Voted today with her daughter. Her daughter voted for the first time. They didn't cancel each other out. They both voted for Trump and sanity. Have you voted yet, Virginia? We'll talk about that with Christian Heiens coming up. He's a political analyst. He's an election modeler, and he does know the details of the early vote in Virginia. What is it telling us? Christian, we'll talk about that next. Well, good afternoon to you. It's now 5:35, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Virginia is one of those states that much of the country is kind of ignoring in this presidential election, but should they? Is it possible for Donald Trump to achieve the impossible, to win the Commonwealth of Virginia? So many Republican early voters are trying to make that happen. For more on that subject, I want to turn now to Christian Heiens. He's a political analyst and election modeler. Additionally, he's the co-host of the Making the Argument podcast, where you certainly can hear more about this as well. Christian, good to talk to you today, sir.
Thanks for having me on.
This is a fun topic, early voting in Virginia. I do see a lot of polling that suggests that Virginia is out of reach for Republicans. In fact, I spoke to J.D. Vance on Monday of this week, and he told us that he said it's definitely going to be more difficult in Virginia, but he thinks it's possible. How do you score it?
I'm probably in the same camp as him. Harris is definitely favored, but I will say from what I'm seeing in terms of early voting and the modeling that I've been building since 2019 that accurately predicted Youngkin's victory within 0.05% of the final result, what I'm seeing right now suggests that Virginia is going to be a lot closer than it was in 2020.
How close could it be, do you think? I mean, I know that's hard to predict, but it seems that we are seeing a lot of Republican enthusiasm in the Commonwealth.
So my modeling right now, which I haven't publicly released yet, so your viewers get a bit of a sneak peek here, has Harris winning by between 5 and 6.
Okay.
But it's based on a couple things that haven't yet been solidified because we're still relatively early in the early vote process. I will say if turnout ends up looking like 2023 or 2021, where Republicans have a good election day turnout, in addition to where they're at right now with early voting, the model technically says that it's not outside the realm of possibility for this race to be decided by quite literally a single point. But that would be weighing everything in favor of the Republicans right now.
Now, help me understand this, because if you're relying on sort of election day turnout being similar to those timeframes, one thing that I imagine has to be happening is that Republicans are at the moment sort of cannibalizing the normal election day turnout because so many Republicans are choosing instead to opt for early voting, right?
So obviously both sides are cannibalizing election day vote because, 4 out of 4 voters, these are people that showed up in 2023, 22, 21, and 20. They're voting early. But what's important to note is where Republicans are getting more of their early vote from compared to Democrats. My model right now actually has Republicans outright beating Democrats when it comes to 0 out of 4 voters. So these are voters that are either newly registered, many times they're, kids in their 20s or late teens, or they're voters that quite literally have not shown up in any of the last 4 election cycles in Virginia. And Republicans are beating them in early voting. We shouldn't even be close with this demographic right now. And I think it really suggests that the early vote network that, Governor Youngkin has really been pushing has been successful in targeting low propensity voters, which should help us on election day rather than hurt us.
Would you give me a sense of what Virginia early voting trends look like? Because I think the audience is interested in how do we know that it's Republicans who are turning out and not just a mix of Democrats and Republicans at equal rates?
So that's what I've been spending the last 5 years building a model for. I started this actually with the Freitas congressional campaign in 2020 for the federal elections. I previously did this for the state legislature for the House of Delegates in 2019. But what we've been seeing here is that the early vote breakdown is significantly redder than it was even in 2021. To give you an idea, my same model that I used to accurately predict Youngkin's victory in 2021 shows that on this day in 2021, Democrats were leading about 65-35 in the early vote. And as of this morning, they're currently only leading 59-40. So again, Republicans are over 40% in terms of the early vote, and this is unprecedented. They've never been this close before in any of the last 4 cycles.
And when you say that these are Republicans who are voting, is this based on very red districts in the state? How do we know a Republican voter has cast a ballot?
So it's based on a combination of demographics, locality, voting history. So you can look at things like, primary voting records. And it's also based on backtracking this same model that I'm running this cycle to previous cycles to make sure that it actually lines up with how we know the early vote actually ended up breaking down between Democrats and Republicans. When you put all of those metrics together, you end up getting a model that's relatively accurate.
How are the blue districts doing right now, like the Fairfax counties and the Loudoun counties? What are you seeing in their turnouts?
So turnout in Northern Virginia is currently down compared to parts of the rest of the state. So you're thinking like Shenandoah Valley, South Side, Central Virginia, where I'm located in Culpeper. But it's worth noting that, Democrats have talked about how, they're going to have more polling stations opening up in places like Fairfax, which will happen. But again, when you look at where we are now versus where we were in previous cycles, they had the same exact problem, right, where they needed new polling stations opening up. It's not that that's really going to change things dramatically any more than we're already expecting to. It's more about where they are right now versus where they were in previous cycles, even absent of new polling stations opening up. They're in a much rougher position than they were 4 years ago, or even where they were last year when they flipped the legislature. So I think that's where some of the panic is coming from. It's not necessarily, we need new polling stations, because they always get those. I think it's more of a panic of looking at where they are right now compared to where they were in previous cycles.
Among the Republican early vote that you're watching, was it front-loaded at all? Meaning, did Republicans show up in the very first days of early voting, get their ballots out, and then we began to peter off, or are the trends holding?
Yes, that always happens. So this has been a reoccurring trend going all the way back to 2021, that every year Republicans start off relatively strong with the exception of the 2022 midterm cycle. And then they end up losing ground as new polling sites open up, as Democrats start voting by mail. That typically comes in a little bit later than voting in person. Although it's worth noting that once you get into mid-October, like we are right now, you end up seeing a reversal of that trend where the Democrats start losing steam and Republicans start gaining ground again. This is what famously happened in 2021. In fact, it was actually just 3 days ago in 2021 marked the anniversary of Democrats peaking in terms of early voting. And every subsequent day past that, it wasn't like a straight drop down for them, but they never again recovered their advantage that they had established in early October. So at the moment, it seems like that it's moving in that direction, but we need more data before we can draw hard conclusions about that.
So we're going to have obviously more data with each passing day. How important are the next 2 weeks, let's say, to your models?
The next 2 weeks are going to be entirely what builds this model. Once I release this model, it'll probably be after October 21st. It's going to be leaning heavily on what's going to happen in the next 10 to 14 days. If Republicans keep up the momentum that we've seen the last 48 hours with them voting early and actually eroding the Democrat margins, then we have to start having a serious conversation about whether or not Virginia is actually in play. If they don't, or if Democrats start rallying again and actually regain some of the ground that they've lost recently, then again, we're probably looking more at like a Harris plus 5 to 8 range for the final outcome in Virginia.
Obviously, every state's going to have a different campaign apparatus trying to get out the vote, and some of them will be more effective than others. But it does feel like that a lot of the trends we might see in Virginia could be duplicated all across the country, given the mood of the country. How much of a bellwether do you think Virginia is, especially if Trump achieves a victory here? What does that tell us about the rest of the country?
If Trump achieves a victory here, then you are looking at a blowout. You're looking at him winning virtually every single swing state in the country and potentially picking off one of either Minnesota or New Hampshire as an additional upset. Now, if he just comes close, right, if he comes within 6 points or even within 7 points, honestly, my money would still be on Trump at that point, right? I mean, because that would represent a 3 or 4 point shift to the right versus 2020, to go back to what you said about whether or not Virginia could be a bellwether. So quite frankly, I think that it doesn't even matter if Trump ultimately wins the Commonwealth. If he improves by 3 or 4 points, that's going to resonate in states like North Carolina that have very similar demographics to Virginia. It might play out in Pennsylvania as well, especially if you see fewer turnout and Democrat strongholds like Philadelphia. So I think what happens in Virginia is actually crucial to the nation, regardless of whether or not Trump actually ultimately carries the Commonwealth on election night.
And we should get our results from Virginia election night. Is that right?
Yeah, we should, barring, some type of Florida 2000 situation where the Commonwealth's decided by 500 votes or something like that. We should most likely know who the victor is in the Commonwealth by election night. It might be late in the night if it's close, but we should definitely go to bed knowing who carried Virginia.
So we'll learn a lot from that, even if other states are lagging behind, like Pennsylvania famously has and will this year. I want to talk not just about the presidential race, but drilling down for a moment. Virginia 7 apparently looks very good for a Republican pickup. Derek Anderson is doing very well there in that open seat. How important is that race?
That race might end up determining control of the House of Representatives. So I would say it's, top 15, top 10 most important races in the entire country right now. And you're right that Anderson has been running a relatively strong campaign from what we've seen. And the data shows this, right? Early vote turnout in the 7th district is one of the highest congressional districts in the state right now. And I think part of that energy is being driven by the fact that the western parts of the district, particularly where I live in Culpeper and Orange and Greene and Madison, the turnout there is just through the roof compared to the blue parts of Prince William County, which is really what Democrats are going to be relying on to try to hold this seat. If Anderson manages to win this district, then almost certainly Republicans are going to hold control of the House of Representatives on election night.
There's a lot at stake here, a lot at stake. What are President Trump's coattails like? To what extent is he helping or maybe hurting candidates? What is he doing for candidates like, say, Senate candidate Hung Cao?
Well, I think one of the things he's going to do for Hung Cao is he's really going to juice up turnout in Southwest Virginia and South Side. So Hung Cao's center of support is mostly geared towards Northern Virginia, right? He famously ran in 2022 in the 10th district in Loudoun and Fauquier and Prince William. And he came very close to actually flipping a seat that, quite frankly, Republicans had no business winning, which is part of the reason we nominated him this cycle, because we thought he was a strong candidate. So if Trump is able to help Hung Cao with his turnout in South Side, Southwest, the Shenandoah Valley, Central Virginia, that can really go a long way, especially if Hung Cao is able to replicate his showing from 2022 in Northern Virginia and particularly in a county like Loudoun and Prince William.
And I spoke with Hung about the University of Mary Washington poll that came out recently, some other surveys showing him a lot closer than many expected. That Mary Washington survey showed him within 6 points of Tim Kaine. Tim Kaine is clearly taking Hung Kao seriously enough to be spending money in this race, to be advertising to try and beat him. They just had a debate a week ago. What do you think of that race and how close things are?
I think it's quite telling that Tim Kaine is running ads talking about how he drives down to Abingdon. He seems to be running a campaign where he's pretending that it's still 2008, and he expects that he's going to get a whole lot of support in Southside and Southwest Virginia and the Shenandoah Valley. That's not going to happen. Tim Kaine's going to get blown out of the water in those parts of the state. I think he knows it. I think that the campaign strategies that he's running on right now, in some ways, show an act of desperation. Certainly, he's favored to win. I think that most people who are looking at this race would expect him to win, but I also believe that most people are expecting this to be much closer than it was in 2018. And I think that's what's worrying the Tim Kaine campaign right now.
Well, I like when he's sweating. That's a good thing. All right, Christian Heiens, I would be so pleased to have you back with us as the election continues. Thank you really for your time today. Appreciate that.
Thanks so much for having me. Glad to be on.
Really good to talk to you. All right, that's Christian Heiens, who's keeping track of this whole election in the Commonwealth of Virginia, political analyst, election modeler. Some good news about Republican turnout. And as you heard from him, over the next 2 weeks, he's going to get the best impression of how this election is going to go. If Republicans can maintain that energy, if a lot of voters keep showing up to those early voting sites all across the Commonwealth and casting those ballots for people like Hung Kao and President Trump and Derek Anderson, Mike Van Meter, and so many others, you could see some big nights. You can see a big night on election night. Hold on, it's 5:49 now. Kamala Harris is currently getting her butt handed to her by men in the United States. So they have a new strategy. They want to appeal to men, do manly things to make men vote for her. And the manly things include, according to Politico, a Good Morning America interview. I'm sorry. I'll read the rest of the list. A Good Morning America interview with Michael Strahan. That Tim Walz did that this morning. Michigan events tonight, I guess, geared towards black men. Friday night lights at Mankato West. And then pheasant hunting with social media influencers. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to watching Elmer Fudd hunt pheasant. That's going to be great. Way to go, Tim Walz. That Walz interview with Michael Strahan on Good Morning America has already been a complete disaster. Strahan was asking him about ending the Electoral College.
I want to go back to something you said on Tuesday. You said, I think all of us know the Electoral College needs to go. But the campaign came out later that night, and they said that's not their stance.
Yeah. Well, it's not the campaign's position. And the point I'm trying to make is that there's folks that feel every vote must count in every state. And I think some of folks feel that's not the case. Our campaign does that. And the point I'm saying is I'm in 5 states in 2 days. We're out there making the case that the campaign's position is clear, that that's not their position. Their position and my position is to make sure that everybody understands their vote, no matter what state they're in, matters.
So that's something that you and Vice President Harris disagree on?
I have spoken about it in the past, that she's been very clear on this, and the campaign, and my position is the campaign's position.
Yeah, what a joke. This guy wants to hurt his own state. He's like, screw them. Let's just go with, we'll just do only these heavy, densely populated Democrat states. They should be in charge of the rest of the country. What a joke. And then Strahan also asked about his many lies.
Let's talk about your record. And you call yourself a knucklehead. You call yourself a knucklehead because you've made some statements that just aren't true. And the comment about weapons of war that I carried in war, which you didn't. You said that you were in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square massacre when you weren't. You kind of chalked it all up to bad grammar or getting the dates wrong.
Yeah.
But your opponents say you lied to make yourself look better. Do they have a point?
Well, look, 35 years ago, got the opportunity to be in Hong Kong, be in China, learned a lot about it, served 24 years in the National Guard, passionately, in an instance, talking about gun violence in schools, on an instance there. Proud of the service that I've done. Proud to be a teacher in that classroom. Proud to have been very public all these years and owning it when I, said, look, I was there in August of '89.
Strahan continues here. He's like, I think people are going to think that you're just a liar. Michael Strahan, who knew Michael Strahan would be one of the best journalists of the cycle? He was great on defense. He's also great on offense, it turns out. Have a great weekend. Mark Levin, the great one, up next.